Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight. Before we start, I'd like to acknowledge that we are all on traditional lands. I am on the land of the Gadigal people from the Eora Nation, and I would like to pay my respect to elders both past, present, and future, and to all those of Aboriginal descent that are amongst us. So today's talk is about a look at today's culture. And if history is where we encounter God, we must already look with immense gratitude at the part of history in which we are living today. Sometimes it happens to me, and perhaps to you too, to look at the world and see that the ideal that we have actually espoused may actually be far away. But if we manage to light the lamp of our eyes, we will actually discover it to be very different. And we'll be able to pass through the streets of this earth, tracing, as Chiara would say, streaks of light. That is why we want to know him more, so that we can love him better. It's with this attitude of the intelligence of the heart that I would like us to approach this knowledge exchange that we will have tonight. The title of the lecture is truly challenging: A Look at Today's Culture. As I read it, I was immediately struck by some questions that could actually start to begin guiding our reflection. Can we really talk about culture in the singular? Shouldn't actually be talking about cultures? And why is it necessary to talk about culture today? Why is it necessary to talk about culture in order to start a talk about dialogue? What's the relationship between the two? Knowing that this is a space designed to serve a reality present in many parts of the world, is it possible to find something that is common, that unites us? Is dialogue different today from what was required of us 20 or 30 years ago? There would be 1,000 definitions that we could find. But here we will understand it above all as the anthropological context in which human beings participate in the creative dimension of God, expressing the relationship we have with nature and communicating our experience of beauty, hope, encounter, joy, or the overcoming of pain through the artistic, ritual, and celebratory dimensions. Piero Coda, who's a very well-known theologian within the Focolare movement, points out that every culture has a particular and distinctive dimension and a universal one, in that it potentially expresses the whole of the human being. However, he also points out that it's the spiritual dimension of faith that makes the culture transcend and prevents it from closing down on itself. UNESCO tells us that culture encompasses the ways of life and the fundamental rights of human beings, of their value systems, their traditions, and beliefs. And Pope Francis emphasizes the particular way the members of a culture relate to each other, to other creatures, and to God. Understood in this way, he says, culture encompasses the totality of the life of a people. So, if culture refers to the set of relationships in which we are embedded and that connect us, it's not then difficult to find the link with dialogue and the cultural aspects that unite us, despite our different origins. First of all, we are united by the charism of unity, which gives our relationships a very special stamp insofar as it aims at mutual love, mutual recognition, and mutual esteem. But we also live in a context that has been marked in recent decades by a great transformation, by an epochal change that, in my opinion, has three main axes: the globalization of the market, the centrality of technology, and growing individualism and individualization. These elements shape that complex scenario that has been called the network society or the information society. It's a reality that envelops all of us, even if it excludes us in some instances. This change undoubtedly has an important influence on all our relationships, and we are aware of this. But perhaps we do not realize to what extent, and therefore we are not always able in our daily lives to make those values that are fundamental and constitutive of us, to make them prevail. So it's first and foremost a society characterized by unregulated economic exploitation, networked organization, fluidity of relationships, and constant change. It can be said that it's a society where everything we see, think, or feel can be this way or even different. Anything is possible. Anything is possible. It's a society of constant change, which is difficult for us to understand and live in, which has opened up infinite possibilities, and at the same time makes us feel rootless, without fixed points, and without a clear future, becoming for many of us a society of fear. Information communication technologies have made all the difference between who we were, who we are now, and who we could become. It's a change that is particularly evident in the way we interact with each other. We interact with machines, with things, and with the environment. Indeed, it is the smartphone that gives us the first good morning and immediately puts us in touch with the world, offering us information on the weather or what is happening at the extremities of the world, inviting us to take some time to meditate or calm our minds. Information communication technology is changing our lives and has had a radical and widespread impact on contemporary ethical debates. The hyper-connected and hyper-complex society in which we live, and to which these technologies have given rise, has its main resource, the processing and elaboration of information and knowledge. At the core of it is data, a resource that is growing exponentially. For the first time in history, the human mind is a direct productive force, not just a determining element of the production system. In a way, it is precisely of the human mind that these technologies as a whole want to become an extension. It's a global, pervasive economy that lives off our data, our thoughts, our emotions, collecting them and turning them into capital, and us into the product. Of course, this is an extraordinary scenario that seems to be tailor-made for the realization of the utomless. May they all be one. And it is. But it requires great attention and knowledge on our part, so that economic logic does not impose itself on our freedom and creativity as people, as beloved children who want to love. We can therefore ask ourselves, how does this scenario affect or transform our capacity for dialogue? Dialogue is a wonderful word, which means crossing over, taking the risk of entering through words into a world unknown to us, the world of the other. It means going beyond our limits, crossing the boundaries of the other to find ourselves in the middle ground, where a world that none of us knows yet lives. We live in that world, where the truth has a few more faces to reveal to us. It's a destabilizing act. It makes us uncomfortable, but one that leads us towards a greater fullness. When we actually dialogue, we feel whole, which is why we cannot do without it. Although potentially the world in which we live is a privileged space open to plurality and multiplicity, to the encounter with the other, we should actually be aware that it is also underpinned, underneath it is a system that influences our thoughts through algorithms and information, and hence how it makes us look and see the other. It actually has an influence on the way we speak, on the words we choose, because it changes our use of the language. And it imposes on us the primacy of images. It influences our ability to listen, because our attention is overstimulated, or because we lack real shared codes. We could highlight many things, but let us choose at least 4 areas. The first one is the neotribes. When we live in a world where everything is moving, where the sense of belonging goes beyond, where we need symbolic figures and strong points to which we can cling and attach ourselves, then what today we know as tribalism can actually emerge. These are tribes, if you wish. They are trenches who defend God, who defend the nation, defend ethnicity, defend the family, or the area, the region in which we live, or even defend the fundamental centuries-old values and categories that constitute our existence. This is a phenomenon that strongly marks today's world and is reinforced by the algorithmic system that makes us aware of only some aspects of reality, hiding others, and it feeds on our fears. These structures, this computer code, these cookies, as we know them, with the apparent good intention of simplifying our lives, making it easier for us to understand, and making us feel singular, individual, give us more sense of who we are as an individual. Very, very subreptitiously direct our choices by strong conditioning that leads us, for example, to choose people on the basis of profiles, targets, stereotypes. In this way, we tend to move towards people like us and end up in what we call echo chambers that protect us from any diversity. We want to mix with people like us, who share our ideas, who share our view of the world, and who will not oppose. So whatever is different, whatever is opposite, limits our, and we push away from it, but we don't. It's the technology that moves us away from it. And as a result, it actually limits our critical capacity and our capacity to accept difference and human diversity. But problem is, to have a dialogue, there must be at least 2 human people, 2 different people who want to let themselves be crossed, who want to interact with each other, who are ready to let themselves be discovered, be deconstructed, who recognize each other equally with dignity, even with the mutual diversity between them. The information society and the networked world treats differences in two particular ways. On the one hand, it levels everything by making everything look equal in value, by making everything look the same. And so difference is not recognized and is not valued. It tends to eliminate, block, and cancel the differences. Just think of an event such as the Christchurch bombings in New Zealand, the biggest massacre in New Zealand, broadcast online, watched live by many, multiplied by thousands of shares on the internet. If it were an isolated incident, one could simply say that was, the work of a sick man. But unfortunately, more and more cases exist in which people are returning to assert something about themselves by eliminating others. What makes it really serious is also the fact that this act of terror is turned into a multimedia message that is filling blogs, websites, videos, all in real time, and attracting people who are thinking and who agree with it. Behind this pain and horror of what has happened, we read in all of this a cry, a scream, a request for recognition of one's identity. And let's face it, this fact is not new. But what is new is that with the internet, the scope of every single act immediately becomes global, planetary. In reality, this position does nothing but highlight in some way the fear of being different, the fear of differences that form the constituent characteristic of cultures, ethnic groups, religions, differences that often come under pressure in an attempt to silence the conflicts and tensions that diversity could bring with it. So denying differences does not lead to dialogue, however, but to the suppression of the other, or at best to indifference. So faced with the idea that we might lose control of what happens between us and the other people, or in order to avoid conflict and friction, constraints or constriction that might arise, we rely on the media and keep our loneliness in touch at all times. There's a second framework, which is tales and fables. Before the internet, stories, fairy tales, fiction usually had different and well-recognized spaces, specific publications, particular and clearly distinguishable media genres. One of the things that denotes change in our time is precisely the fact that these spaces no longer exist. In the current scenario, where the production of information goes from many to many and spreads at the speed of light, it is not easy to grasp the key difference between these genres and language, and to distinguish between the narratives, the stories that are real from those who have got other purposes and aims. We move from one to the other, even without realizing it. Some ways in which the interweaving of truth and fiction is played out are, for example, the difficulty of understanding who really is behind the message that is coming to us through the mass media and through the internet. This is an ever-present risk, but one that is amplified by the ease with which one can display a made-up identity, which, in addition to being cute, also encourages deception. The act of making someone who's receiving the message believe They are seeing a picture, a situation, or an event that instead contains or conceals something completely different. A very common example of this is a news report that actually is a commercial. Other events are created, like stories, situations, produced in order to broadcast and trigger, for example, conflicting reactions, a polemical discussion, something that in politics it is used quite often. They are not real events. They are pseudo events. They are also the factoids, fake news, a sort of collective hallucination provoked. These are pure inventions, urban legends, gossip that is treated as real news, and as such can produce effects on the public that sometimes even affect international relations between states. In order to understand the influence that this can have on dialogue, let's take an example from Colombia. A peace treaty was supposed to sanction the end of a decade-long armed conflict that has painfully scarred every Colombian family. The text of the agreement contained controversial elements, and the country was divided into a yes and a no camp. A referendum was proposed, supported by two information campaigns. One focused on the proposal of the yes vote, the other one on the no vote. The first one was focusing on the power of social network. The first one focused on the proposal of a new country, a harmonious country, a united country. And those on the no side, according to the creator of the campaign for the no side, designed a campaign based on the power of social networks that made each type of user see a certain type of information and hid other types of information from them. The aim was to provoke indignation without going into the merits of the referendum choice. Rather than discuss the issue, they wanted them to feel that was being said was not right, without giving them the information, just to feel wrong about it. It was a smokescreen, and that created a radically divided society that many of whom did not end up knowing the truth nor the facts, which is obviously fundamental for starting a new chapter in their story and their history. Like this case, we know many in other countries. So if on the one hand, we're faced with extraordinary ability to access stories, accounts of people, close and distant in space and time, like never before. And on the other, information that is both linked and disaggregated so as to be transformed with a variety of visual, auditory, textual expression and languages that until recently was only possible in fantasy, can distort reality as well as can redefine reality. Our perception of reality can actually be changed through these mechanisms. This strategy that is being used for lying, along with that of creating fake news, has become the main key in the construction of the category of an enemy. It is therefore a vast subject and above all an old communication practice, which with the advent of new technologies has acquired sometimes uncontrollable dimensions and has led in the world, in our communities and in our families, to authentic radicalization, polarization, and splits. One of the tragedies of our time is also to be able to reduce entire complex realities to one word, often lacking depth, encapsulating hundreds and thousands of stories, but impoverishing them Say, for example, we use expressions like Anglo, migrant, refugee, unemployed, student. These things make us live by stereotype, and they hide the richness and the diversity of the reality. Major communication systems that we consume seem to lead us to living immersed in simplification, trying to reduce and contain the expression of these things to pictures, to emojis. It's a new language, which the new media, the internet media, the worldwide globalization are increasingly spreading. It does not invent new words. It reduces the ones we have. It's enough to think, for example, of words of high symbolic content loaded with meaning, such as the word freedom. It gradually seems to no longer, or mainly, indicate an innate possibility to dream, to dissent, to donate, nor even the values, ideals, or political conquests of a couple of centuries ago. It is reducing the meaning only to the absence of obstacles, the lack of external impediments. Indeed, we could say, with Besnier, the author, when you empty words of their substance, you do more than lay the foundations of a new language that can still lend itself to investigation. You undermine the very historical meaning that the spirit needs in order to develop and grow. In this sense, the deliberate attack on language exposes us to censorship of our collective memory. The political achievements, the reflection accumulated over the centuries disappear behind merely instrumental use of language. The way to manipulate reality is to manipulate words, said Philip K. Dick of the United States. This fragmented, fast-paced way of speaking, full of images, is at odds with our ability to listen, to interiorize, to be silent. These frameworks, however, are not all negative. They are not intended to depict a fatalistic picture. There is actually a positive aspect to the internet. The internet presents itself as, first and foremost, the icon of the deepest reality that underlies every possible dialogue, a picture of interweaving. It highlights our mutual belonging. But the same digital world that creates and permits the misinformation and confusion, polarization, it turned out to be a part of the solution and an opening for us towards the future. At a time where we are forced to travel less, work remotely, collaborate on virtual spaces, to interact at a distance, to take advantage of all those opportunities that have long been offered to us by the digital world, but we have often preferred to ignore, we have discovered even more the technology's potential to foster genuine encounters and deep bonds between us. Today's culture, the one we find we have in common, despite the plurality, multiple cultures, has got a characteristic. It's distinguished by sometimes painful rediscovery of our common interdependence. We actually need each other. It has highlighted that capacity present in the DNA of every human being to care for others, to establish bonds, a capacity that manifests itself even before the ability for us to talk. It is at the foundation of every other function, communication, and also dialogue. In some ways, we could say that that reality itself has given us back the concept of humanity as one family. And we are beginning to speak clearly, for example, of the need for an education in common humanity or a new humanism. We should not lose sight, as far as dialogue is concerned, of the fact that belonging to a single family does not make us equal. It is not homogenizing. We are still different one from the other, but we can't come together. The main lesson that we learned from the pandemic, we could say, without fear of being wrong, is that it has made it clear how connected we are, how dependent we are on each other. And that's exactly what Pope Francis emphasizes in his new encyclical, recognizing that we are all profoundly brothers and sisters, and acting in such a way that this awareness gives rise to a new history, a new story that has already begun and multiplied as a powerful message with the spread of gestures such as, for example, the peace agreement that happened in Abu Dhabi between Israel and the Gulf states. But in order for all of that we will explore in other lessons, we need to be able to maintain a conscious and critical look at the cultural context in which we move, which is precisely the time and space of our encounter with God. An encounter that takes place through each brother with whom we are called to enter into dialogue, to move our horizon of understanding of the truth a little further, overcoming our fear. In fact, we cannot dialogue in a vacuum. Thank you very much for listening and for participating. We'll now open the floor for questions, comments, and sharing, if we have time.
Karim?
Yes.
Hi, Sean from over in New Zealand here tonight.
Good to see you, Sean.
Nice to listen to you, Karim. Thanks very much. What would you say is the main theme of your presentation from a spiritual perspective, life in the Focolare in the church?
From a spiritual perspective, we actually live. Our encounter with God doesn't happen in abstract. It happens in a time and in a place. And at the heart of that encounter is our encounter with each other as brothers and sisters. Okay?
Yep.
That dialogue, which is a reflection of the dialogue that exists in the Trinity, dialogue of love, okay, can be affected by what is surrounding us. We get exposed to the internet, to the information society, and the talk is about being aware that while what we have in terms of technological means of communication can help us build that dialogue and deepen it, also has got another dangerous aspect if we're not aware, if we're not careful to it, which actually isolates us and closes us on ourselves. And let us, without being aware of it, push away from anything that's different.
Yeah.
But difference, if it is positive, is wonderful. And if it is negative, it is Jesus forsaken. Embracing it opens up the dialogue even deeper.
Yep. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I was fascinated by your example where you say the communication can actually divide a country, becoming a yes and a no. And that very often it has been a challenge of our society nowadays. You see that in America and also even in our own country, with the anti-vaccination or pro-vaccination, this sort of things, and the information happening, every day bombarded with wrong, information. So, what is the response of the movement? It should be in living this challenging time when we are facing with all of this, opposite force to try to convince us that we should not say yes, that we should believe in the wrong thing, that we should not, love our neighbor, and this challenge of communication is relevant. And I like what Sean asked. What is the point of view from the movement? How we can help one another to actually live more proactively in this time of misinformation and this opposite side of yes and no, black and white.
The yes and no forces us to polarize, to go to the exchange of an argument. By our vocation and by our choice of the ideal, we're looking for unity. So there are situations where there is no one answer, and often that's not the case. And in a split, we actually have a name for that split. It's not a thing, it's a person. It's Jesus forsaken. And our vocation and our call is to go into that spot and, like him, remain stretched between the two. That's the only way to love that pain, accept it, and go beyond it, loving the person in front of us. Often, that's what triggers an understanding of where the truth is. And depending on where we are, whom we are with, that gives us the opportunity to actually then share that wisdom that comes from embracing Jesus forsaken. But it's in staying in that divide and being aware of both arguments, okay? And we may lean towards one, but we won't close our heart to the other. It's the dialogue, keeping the dialogue open, keeping the mutual respect because of the acknowledgement of the dignity of each other, because we are called to live a Trinitarian life and we are God's children.
Thank you, Karim.
You're most welcome. Stephen.
Even though the culture can be so complex and we can be positioned in certain ways, I think people always, well, not always, but people are disposed to respond to love, and an experience which does contain love, in a sense, is able to bridge many diversities. I think that's what we arrived at. But it's lovely how you're saying that this new situation is also an opportunity. And I've read a lovely thing of Pope Francis in Slovakia, where he was looking at this society which is so secularized, and even a generation ago, maybe the people would have looked at the history and the martyrs who died to live the faith, whereas now the young people have got absolutely no idea, and they just see a secularized society and consumerism. But the Pope says, similar to what you're saying, we have to be there. We can't run away to a past that no longer exists. We have to live with the people humbly, but yes, it's as you say, really, to be Jesus forsaken.
Yeah, and as Chiara has taught us, the first step in establishing a dialogue is to actually empty ourselves and try and become one, be one with the other person. So there is no pure evil that exists in the world. Of course, it exists, in the devil, but if it's human, it has a touch of God in there somewhere. And cultures even the worst cultures that exist, there still is a touch of the Holy Spirit in there. And through obviously living the ideal, and particularly if we approach things together with Jesus in our midst, that's when we see those things. We feel them and we appreciate them. And that's what the Pope is doing, is highlighting. And the talk also highlights the fact, I mean, I haven't written this talk. It's it has come from someone who actually has studied this area pretty well. And it's about keeping our mind open, keeping a dialogue open with a culture today that can go head on against everything we believe in. But culture is not an abstract thing. It's a set of behaviors, set of beliefs in people. So we always have to remember, there's the other person who is carrying that culture and living it. Let's find out what are the meeting points, what are the values that we can call on, that then can establish, that can help us open up, listen, and reach out. Don't be afraid, even if it looks like the devil.
If I can jump in with a comment, it makes me think of how easy it is for us to put people in a box. So things like the internet play on that. In fact, all the dangers you've listed in there are human weaknesses that just get magnified by the technology. So how quickly we put people in a box, no? A couple of years ago, I walked into a new class and I saw the student dressed in a particular way. I said, oh no, one of those in my head.
Yes.
Over the year, you get to know a person and you discover this person has a good sense of humor, has this and that and the other. And you discover there's a richness, which, you know, the dress didn't convey. So I think that's like that with all these moments, which is, the good thing is, I think the important thing is to be aware that there's something out there trying to make us lose that capacity. So we need to fight to keep our soul open.
But also from a technology perspective, if you look at how Chiara approached technology, yes, the internet wasn't as, but it happened while she was alive. And she pushed us to use it because she saw it as a sign of the times. And for her, it was the capability, the ability to actually make the whole world a family. It helps us, it connects. Today, we can actually talk to people everywhere around the world.
Look at what we're doing.
Exactly. Look at what we've done with the assembly. And she did say, it is our time. This is our tool. And so being aware of its pitfalls shouldn't blind us to its capability and possibility.
I think Seema had her hand up a minute ago.
Great. Hi, Seema.
Hi, thank you very much for the talk. I liked how it's all about like this communication about how to use everything that we've got in a positive way. So as you said, a human being is a social person. So it's just, even when it's this situation that we're living as we can't meet up face to face, can we create ways of doing that? And we got the tools. We just get to use them actually. Can we do that? It's just we need to start, as we said, start loving, start caring, start using those tools rather than stay in our own room. As you said, we open, we ready for other people invading our room, and we also going to share with each other, and something new comes, makes everyone else is happy and creative, and together we better. I think we realized in this time that together we are better. We don't realize how these things, as we privileged with them, but when they're gone, then we realize how important is this thing. So I'm sure when we appreciate those things better, we can talk about them, and later on when it's opened, we can appreciate every moment that when we see each other better. Thank you, Karim.
Thank you, Sima. Words of wisdom.
Well, it's 7:30 and it looks like we have come to a point where there's no more questions and comments right now. I'm sure that talk has raised a lot of questions and thoughts that might not have been expressed right now, but I hope the thinking and the discussing and the questioning will go on wherever we are. And thank you, Karim, really it wasn't an easy topic and you did it very well. Thank you for presenting it to us. And so thanks to everyone else who's helped with this, also to Giovanni and to Bruno. This is the 4th of 4 lessons, but it's not the conclusion of UPM yet for this year, because in a month's time, I think it's the 20th of October, whatever the 3rd Wednesday is, we will have our little revision session, which will happen, I think, pretty much similar to last year in a kind of fun way. Just an opportunity to bring us together and to look back at some of the things we've heard over the year, to bring them back into refresh our memories on that in a fun and relaxed way. So don't worry about, it's not an exam, it's fun.
Are all the previous sessions available online? I see that
they are, David. Yeah, they are all on YouTube.
Okay.
Yeah, there's UPM even has a YouTube channel, I believe, or like a thing you can subscribe to. All right. Thank you and have a good evening and see you next time.